Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another exciting virtual tour. I'm your guide tonight, Chris. For those of you who are new here, Pretty Gritty Tours is a walking tour company based in Tacoma, Washington that transitioned to doing virtual tours so that people could go and explore while staying home. And tonight is one that I'm very, very excited and passionate about. Searching for Sasquatch. We're going to be looking into why we're even talking about Sasquatch here, why all the Bigfoot love comes into Washington state, where that came from, and where are we now. And honestly, it's difficult to talk about Sasquatch because, not for the reason you think, there's a lot of ownership throughout the country and then through Canada as well of people that feel like they are the definitive Bigfoot territory. Washington state does lay claim to over 1/3 of the reported sightings throughout the entire North American area. So we get a little bit of extra juice on the whole thing tonight. But if you look at sort of a map of area that's considered Bigfoot territory just in Washington state, there's a tremendous amount of green in the area here. And there are a few factors that kind of make the Bigfoot territory acceptable. And one is obviously that it needs to be forested. But another leading theory is that for it to be prime Bigfoot territory, it needs to be near some level of civilization, not a city necessarily, but that they either need or enjoy being around within walking distance of like a farm or something. And the third thing is huckleberries. Of all the reported sightings and cryptozoologists who have gone out and done like in the field serious research on cryptids and Bigfoots in particular, the thing that they seem to come back with overwhelmingly is that the presence of huckleberries attracts Sasquatch. And honestly, why wouldn't it? Because they're the single most delicious berry on earth. I don't care to fight anyone on it. It's basically empirical truth. And that's how we're going to run the tour tonight. So I'm so excited to see you all here. Since this portion is live, please let me know if you have any questions along the way. I'll do my best to answer them. But let's take a look at how we even got onto the Sasquatch kick, because Washington state is objectively obsessed with the legend of Bigfoot. And the idea of Bigfoot having been in the area goes back in time memoriam. It's part of the oral tradition of several of the nations and tribes just in the Washington region alone, but throughout the country as a whole. And the first time that it shows up in mainstream print is in 1958, when a journalist at the Humboldt Times saw a letter that came in from some loggers in California, and they're like, I'm going to have a fun time writing this article, see? I don't know that they spoke like that, but I have to assume that they did. And they wrote this article that the loggers had drafted to them about this enormous 9-foot tall hairy creature coming into their logging camp in the middle of the night and just disturbing things. And it really freaked out all these loggers enough that they decided to write in and describe their experience to a news publication. And that is the first time, 1958, that we ever see the published term Bigfoot. There have been numerous words for this species up to that point, but this is the first time that the most common nickname that we talk about finally shows up. From there, it kind of catches like wildfire, where there are hundreds, if not thousands, of sightings that crop up throughout the Cascade Range in Washington State from there. And then everyone was gung-ho for it. They loved the idea. And suddenly people were seeing Bigfoot everywhere. To the point where in 1969, Skamania County adopted an ordinance protecting Bigfoot. If you're curious what that means, well, it makes killing a Sasquatch punishable, a punishable offense with a $1,000 fine and up to a year in jail. In 1970, the Washington governor ordered Bigfoot to be protected in the state, making him Washington's official state cryptid. If you want to look that up, it's Senate Bill 5615, describing efforts to make Bigfoot the official unknown creature of the state of Washington. It's extraordinary the amount of places that you can find Bigfoot not in the wild. It crops up all the time in publications, Senate bills, and throughout merchandising stations throughout the entirety of the state. So needless to say, Washington State is a hot spot for Bigfoot encounters. And I can tell you, just talking to people, having gotten ready for this tour, it's like, I would say 1 in 3 people that I've spoken to has had what they feel is a genuine encounter with a Bigfoot. And region is really important to that. You know, the people that I've spoken to in sort of like the Tri-Cities area, not so much. But throughout the Cascade Range, it's an overwhelming amount of people. Also throughout the Puyallup Valley and Walla Walla. And that's important because Walla Walla is a major concentration of Sasquatch activity from really the beginning of this story. Spokane County is one of the first places that the idea of Sasquatch shows up in writing. So the first time that people actually see a Bigfoot on a massive scale, though, comes from what I would say is a very famous piece of cinema at this point. If you're not familiar, the 1967 Patterson-Gimlin film is this, and here's a shot from it, 16 millimeter grainy film clip, which shows Sasquatch walking across a sandbar in Northern California. And it is like, it is the cornerstone, the crown jewel of proof for a lot of Bigfoot hunters out there. And mania for this clip really peaks in the 1970s. But if you haven't seen it, the now intensely famous cowboys who shot this while they were riding around in California, Patterson and Gimlin, the names attached to this film, were from Washington State. And while they were out filming their adventure in California, they caught sight of this. And so I've got the clip for you, and let's see if I can roll it for you. Here's the beginning of it, but then I've narrowed it down a little for you as well. So you can find this pretty easily on YouTube. It goes through the entire experience of them riding out there. But here's the part that's really important. That has become, like I said, really the spear tip for so many investigative researchers on their hunt for Sasquatch to find definitive proof. And this footage has been poured over again and again throughout the years. And what I think is pretty extraordinary about it is that while it's been around since the 1960s, it has never officially been debunked. These two just rodeo cowboys out of Yakima County here in Washington State continued to advocate for this film as for its authenticity throughout the entirety of their lives. And it is like this shot, I think in particular, is the universal sort of image of Sasquatch. And what really struck me as interesting about it is that opb.org is an organization that really broke this down. And in particular, a researcher by the name of Jeffrey Meldrum looks at Planet of the Apes, right? So Planet of the Apes comes out in the 1970s, or I guess maybe the 60s. The sequel's in the 70s. But either way, it was cutting edge Hollywood costuming and like prosthetics. And you can see interlaced here. So that's 1970 Planet of the Apes on the far left, and then goes every other one. The Patterson-Gimlin film here from the 1967 footage is interlaced in there as well. And what he thinks is remarkable about it is that you can see the muscles, that there's clear definition of the actual muscles underneath the fur there, whereas it's sort of just a floppy costume that shows up in Planet of the Apes. And so Meldrum here really advances this as proof of the authenticity of this film clip, in that if you can see such incredible muscle definition on the Sasquatch, even in this grainy 16 millimeter film moving around, then clearly it has to be more sophisticated than what was at the time in 1970, the best of the best. Occam's razor would say that that's the most authentic because it's true. The other thing that he thought was interesting is the way that it actually walks, that the way that the foot rolls up as it's moving across that sandbar in Northern California isn't something that you would see a human do, and certainly not a human in costume. And so these are different foot casts from 67 up into the 90s there. And sort of what sets them apart there is the formation between the ball and the heel there. The trailing leg, too, is something that constantly gets brought up because it demonstrates incredible flexibility there. If you want to see it again, I'll bring it up really. I should have started this whole thing too by just acknowledging the fact that Bigfoot is one of the most divisive topics that you can possibly talk about out there, but we're on a mission of exploration tonight, my friends. So whether you're a believer or not, I encourage you to keep an open mind tonight as we uncover the beginning of this whole long story and where it goes. And for me, it really begins with the Patterson-Gimlin film. I know that the first time it's really talked about is in 1958, and obviously the oral legends of it go back way, way before that. But for me, it's definitely that film. That was my first encounter with it. If you don't consider the 1987 Universal Pictures classic Harry and the Hendersons, focusing on a very young John Lithgow, but I'm gonna discount that. The foot casts that people have come up with are pretty extraordinary. And I think that's something that should at least be acknowledged, that not only does Washington State lay claim to over 1/3 of the reported sightings of Sasquatch or Bigfoot in the world, but also the vast majority of foot casts have come from this area here. And what I think is interesting about them is that they're all very similar, not identical, but they, not only in their size and shape, are incredibly similar, but in the depth of their depression. And I think personally, that's pretty remarkable, because any Joe Schmo could go out and, make or carve or create a foot cast. And that has happened several times, that someone's gone out and tried to just like hoax people into the Bigfoot mania. But the ones that have been considered most authentic have the same depth, as if the weight of whatever pressed it down was consistent throughout. And I don't think that's insignificant. But yeah, there's a ton of Bigfoot merchandising that goes on in Washington State, including this fantastic Bigfoot collar. which, in case you're curious, what the heck does a Bigfoot sound like? I'm glad you asked. I have an audio recording from Canada that's been circulating the internet recently that has what is considered the most authentic Sasquatch call. Here it is for you, my friends.
Oh my God.
There are just an endless collection of audio recordings that have come through, and I'm happy to share a lot of the links to those afterwards. Someone brought up a really good point here. So yeah, the enhanced version of the Patterson film where they actually stabilize it is really remarkable. And a lot of the images that I think you'll encounter today are from that stabilized version, and it's crisper, it's clearer. I just wanted you guys to see the original. But yeah, it's super terrifying, honestly. I know from my time just exploring out in the Pacific Northwest, the Bucota area has been a place that has really triggered me, and I think has had the most authentic interaction with. I'm not entirely sure what's out there, but the area has always had a reputation for it. Let's see if I can bring it up for you guys here really quick. So one of the first times, like I said, that we ever see a mention of something that we would now consider Bigfoot is actually with the Spokane area. So the Spokane Indians met a missionary named Elkanah Walker, which is a crazy name, and welcomed him to the area and told him a lot about what he was talking or exploring. And yeah, this is his journal entry here. That they believe in a race of giants which inhabit a certain mountain off to the west of us. Their track is 1.5 feet long. They steal salmon from Indian nests and eat them raw as the bears do. If the people are awake, they always know when they are coming very near by the strong smell that is almost intolerable. And this is not in any way an isolated incident. There is I think, an oral tradition to almost every Indigenous community within the Washington area about something like this. And it usually varies from place to place, but hits some really consistent points. And the Spokane one is the first time we see someone actually write down that account. Now, I don't want to overstep my bounds anywhere, but a lot of the resources that you can look at here, so like this, you can find online here about a lot of the Indigenous sort of legends out there. And this is the first time that I encountered the Siatko origin story. For Siatko, it's the same name that ended up going to the first territorial prison in Washington state, but the whole area was abandoned. One of the reasons that the settlers came there was that there were no other people to really contest them. There was no one that was going to give them a dispute about taking over that land. And it was a taboo area to settle for a lot of the Salish area people. And it's because the legend of Siatko was thick in the area that the Stick Indians were out there. And this is a whole legend about this nocturnal, forest-dwelling, child-snatching cryptid that lived out there, and sort of depends on who you ask where the origin story comes from. But either they used to be people that became feral and then a part of the forest, or that they always were sort of caught in between animal and man. But something that remains consistent throughout is that they live in the forest, that they interact with people on a regular basis, secretly, not out in the open, and that you should never whistle when you're in the woods, that whistling attracts them and sort of provokes violence in them. And it really depends which origin story you're going for, whether they are benign or violent. Throughout the majority of them, the Sasquatch legend maintains that whatever's living out in the woods is friendly, is not dangerous. But a few times they get pretty wild. Another area that really attracts a lot of attention is the Mount St. Helens area. And Mount St. Helens has had perhaps the highest concentration overall of Sasquatch sightings in and around the area, with a steep drop-off after the 1980s. And a lot of people attribute that to the fact that they think the eruption of Mount St. Helens actually devastated the population of Bigfoot out in the area. Before that, though, it was definitely a hot spot there. And the Cascade Range in general continues to be. If you haven't seen this, this is from the Washington State Department of Transportation, from I-90, and they tweeted this not too long ago. Let's see if I can bring up the actual footage for you. This is from a highway cam on I-90. This, for me, is one of the more skeptical moments out there. Also, WADOT isn't our most reliable source for Sasquatch sightings, although they did give us this gem in January of 2020. You might have seen this come through. It was actually tweeted out on the official account. This is a plywood cutout that has been positioned up there for the cameras to pick up. And the guy that monitors the cameras says that this has been going on for about 15 years. It's not just Sasquatch that shows up there, but aliens, Christmas trees, a whole variety of things show up on this camera there. So you got to take everything with a little bit of a grain of salt here. But the Mount St. Helens area in particular is home to one of the craziest stories that I had heard of a wild and dangerous band of Sasquatch coming through. So this is actually from the Bigfoot Sasquatch Museum in North Georgia. And it is about an encounter that happened here in Washington State, just outside of the Mount St. Helens area, where a group saw footprints near Morton and Mossy Rock and heard loud howls in the nighttime, very similar to the sounds that I played for you earlier. And then near Ape Canyon, this party went and had someone throwing rocks at them in the middle of the night. So they go into a cabin to seek safety. All of this takes place in 1924 with a prospector, Fred Beck, as the main narrator of this experience. This is a museum exhibit of his experience. You can see Bigfoot breaking in through the front door here as the men struggle to find safety. And they said that these 12-foot tall ape-like men tried to break into the cabin. They fought them off with a rifle. And then for the remainder of the night, these creatures threw rocks down from the cliff at them. Fred is quoted as saying, "It was the most profound and frightening experience when one of the creatures, being close to the cabin, reached an arm through the chinking space and seized one of our axes by the handle." Based on which account you read, he either shot at it and scared it away, or somebody else did. But either way, this is Fred here, Fred Beck, circa 1964, with the rifle in question that he used, or someone else used, to save his life, and the book that he wrote. So one of the big things about Fred Beck's life is that he continued to write about it, and the book on the side there, Fought the 8 Men of Mount St. Helens, was a bestseller for a period there, and it depicts this experience pictured here. While Fred Beck is definitely on the fringe of sort of Bigfoot Sasquatch experiences, there have been other more reliable sources, and a few of them I've got for you here. So this is footage from Mount St. Helens in early 2000.
Hey, there's something down there. You see that in the clearing?
Oh yeah. For me, that's one of the more compelling ones, but you have to set it alongside a lot of the other footage that you'll find online, including this one, which is, in my opinion, an absolute hoax and a terrible one that's drifting around. But this is another Bigfoot sighting in Washington state. And this is what we have to sift through on our quest to prove the existence of Sasquatch, is that there are a lot of people out there who would like to hoax, disprove, or just find the whole thing hilarious. And so they flood the internet with videos of it. So as you're combing through, I think there are certain videos that are more compelling than others. This next clip in particular, I really enjoy because what I think is so authentic about it is the fear of the person who was filming it. And while he was doing it, he said that he just encountered something that he thought was on the edge of the forest. He was filming it on his phone, and that after he saw it, he didn't even think, he just ran because something just took over inside of him and he was completely afraid. When you go through all the various clips, it's, I think, pretty easy to identify the people that are genuinely afraid. And when you're just out alone in the wilderness and something like that goes past, there's some good reason for that. So here's the thing. If you're looking for some credible resources that have been around in the area, very recently, Mitchell Townsend, out of Centralia, Washington, actually, who has multiple doctorates attached to his title, presented a forensic scientific proof of what he said was conclusive evidence of a giant unclassified hominin in the 69th Annual Anthropology Research Conference here in Tacoma, actually. And the thing that he came forward with was that he found bone assemblages around Mount St. Helens, just like a lot of the other sightings in the area. And what he was sort of bringing forward was that the tooth marks imprinted upon the bones were made by, in his opinion, an 8'8" tall humanoid creature that left 16-inch footprints and other forensic and behavioral information that he was bringing forward as scientific research. And his big point was that if this concept of Sasquatch is going to be brought forward to a lot of people, it needs to be done in the scientific method so that people can actually, you know, prove or disprove, refute, or accept certain points here. And so he brought up one of the really interesting points, which is, if Sasquatch is out there, where's the proof? Where are the skeletons in particular? And I think again and again, when you go through the research, and in my personal opinion, it's not unfeasible to think that a skeleton wouldn't have been found, because people don't encounter the skeletons of large creatures out in the forest very regularly. When something gets close to the end of its life, it usually goes off and dies alone and then gets scavenged fairly quickly. And if we're operating under the assumption that Sasquatch, Bigfoot, is an intelligent creature, it's not unbelievable to think that they would take care of their dead on their own. So we're in a very gray area here as to whether or not something could easily be found, but I think a skeptic attitude is something always healthy to take into any situation. Which brings me to our next friend here, Paul Freeman. So other than Mount St. Helens, I think the area that I've personally encountered the most high concentration of people that have had Bigfoot sightings or have found proof that they wanted to bring forward is the Walla Walla region, in particular, the Blue Mountains. And Paul Freeman was a cryptozoologist who had a wealth of foot casts from Bigfoot encounters that he had had, but he also had video that he had captured in the 1990s. Now, what made him so successful was in the 1980s when he went out and took a plaster cast of what he said was a Sasquatch footprint. It was the first time someone had brought back a foot cast that had dermal ridges. And that really launched, for a lot of people, their true belief in the fact that this could be something that really exists. So the first thing I want to show you is the Freeman file here. This is him out in the woods taking casts, and then I'm going to show you what he found that he claims is a Sasquatch.
Some of those little ones' tracks that's in here. I come back up here today to cast these. They look like they're about 9 inches long. They're pretty good little tracks. They're sure little and went right up this old trail. Run around up there to his mommy, I guess. Yeah, I'm gonna mix up some plaster here and pour these. Now I got my cast made.
So while Paul Freeman is out here taking casts, he's just filming the forest, and he notes that he thinks the footprints are fairly fresh, and then when he looks up, he encounters this.
Oh, there he goes. Jesus. Get up here where I can see him real quick. Get up here. Get a better picture. Where the doggone thing went? It crossed right up there. Yeah. I just wonder. It should be right here somewhere.
Freeman, like I said, has some of the most conclusive evidence for people. Not only the fact that there are dermal ridges, that there are essentially toe prints in the plaster casts that he comes back with, but then later in the 1990s, he comes back with this video. But a lot of anthropologists, zoologists who end up becoming cryptologists really look towards Freeman as sort of the beginning flagship of the scientific research that they end up doing. And one of the big ones, let's see if I can bring him up here really quick. So here's Paul Freeman's plaster casts, for those of you who are asking, with those dermal ridges involved there. One of the anthropologists he ends up inspiring is Grover Sanders, who was born in the 1930s, ends up dying, unfortunately, of pancreatic cancer in 2002. But he was an American anthropologist and cryptozoologist, and he is one of the few scientists who have gone all out and declare that he is researching Bigfoot and really wanted to contribute something to the scientific community to prove this or not. And he was a divisive character, I think, to say the least. But really advanced the field of study in a lot of ways. This particular picture is because he donated his body to science at the end. He wanted his skeleton to be articulated and then kept in the Smithsonian Institution, where it is today, along with his dog that he was very fond of. And he wasn't someone who rested on his laurels. He did a tremendous amount of historic research in Europe, China, and Java. And he was a member of Mensa. He had an incredibly high IQ. And so outside of just his like formal studies that he did in evolutionary science and anthropology with a focus on primatology, he really developed an interest in Bigfoot, due in no small part to the contributions that Paul Freeman made out in the wild of the Blue Mountains there. And so here's another one of Krantz later on in his life going through his belief out there. And one of the things he toyed with was the possibility that Bigfoot or Sasquatch could be a member of this giant ape family that would have come over from Asia when the water was low and there was a land bridge in between North America and Asia, and that it had just taken up habitation out here. And it really depends on which camp you sit in as to whether or not that's a very plausible theory, but it's definitely something that he advocated hard throughout his lifetime there. And one of his big stances was that some body needed to be found. And bear in mind, a lot of his research was happening when you're looking here at the time when a tremendous amount of sightings were happening in Washington state. And so you look at the overlay of Sasquatch territory based on the areas where the amount of sightings come through, and it's all highly forested stuff. For me, I think a moment that really set it apart, the sort of like Sasquatch legend in Washington state, happened in the 1970s here in Bellingham, primarily on Lummi Nation. So if you're not familiar, Lummi Nation, the tribal reservation that's north of Seattle, right near Bellingham, and goes out onto Lummi Island as well, had a huge string of Bigfoot sightings, over 100 in 1975. And it really came to a head when a woman named Emma Smith in October of 1975 reported that a Bigfoot attempted to break into her home. And so she ran away. She was terrified. A Sergeant Cooper, who was in the area, responded to the incident and found that the storm door on her house had been torn off of the wooden frame and splintered. And boards from a nearby smokehouse had also been ripped apart, like completely shattered into little pieces. When he returned to her residence around 2:30 in the morning, he was looking around with his flashlight on his patrol car, the like spotlight there, and he found a group of 7 people who were already there with their own spotlights set directly on this huge, by his description, 7.5 foot tall, hairy creature. He took out his shotgun, he aimed it at the creature, and concerned that it was just some hoaxer out there in a costume, yelled at them that they needed to get out of the area. And they just crouched down really low and continued to watch him until it crept away into the woods, and he never discharged his weapon. This incident of hundreds of reported sightings and encounters, I think there have been thousands of sightings throughout Washington state, but actual encounters of people having property damage and calling the police out to the area was something pretty new and exciting to the area. And it was happening in the 1970s. So it set off Bigfoot mania, certainly throughout the Bellingham area, making it, in my opinion, the Sasquatch capital to Washington state. I'm not an expert by any means, but when I tell people where they should start their investigation anywhere, it usually starts with Bellingham. They're also, Whatcom County, if I'm not mistaken, one of the first, if not only places to have that fine to make it illegal to hunt or kill a Sasquatch, which really takes something out of the hypothetical and puts it in the real, in my opinion. Not only is it a beautiful area, but obviously densely forested and has a lot going on with it. Now, I do want to show you guys here, this is not from the Washington area. This is from Yellowstone Park, but this comes from a YouTube user, Mary Greeley, who records videos all throughout the area here, but she caught something that she thinks was a Sasquatch encounter. And this was for a while on the National Parks website. So let's see if I can bring this up for you guys. I'm sorry, that's the Mount St. Helens one. This is of the buffalo returning to Yellowstone Park, and zoomed way in, you'll see this. So this is a good question here. Yeah, there have been a series of videos, if I'm thinking of the same ones here, where someone was actually able to capture what they thought was, and I believe this was on perhaps the East Coast, the face of a Sasquatch looking at them, and the blink. You can see the eyes of the Sasquatch actually blink before it turns and moves out into the woods. And if I'm recalling it correctly, it was an albino Sasquatch, so it stood out pretty clearly in the forest there. And no, there's been no official discrediting of that footage to my knowledge. If anybody else knows, let me know. And yeah, this is the thing that every time I watch that Yellowstone clip, I think about, A, massive. Whatever is out there is tremendous and huge, and A, they're just walking around in the snow, this collection, this family of them near bison returning to the area, which is bananas. If you're a human being, you shouldn't be walking near bison for any reason. I really don't care your opinion on that. So it's definitely something that I put in the camp that advances the theory that this is something going on out there. Let me bring you right back here. So the thing that I love about Washington State are the people that have dedicated so much time and effort to this. This is Jim Sherman. He worked, I believe, maybe still, but at Birmingham Groves High School as the history teacher. And in his free time, he is a Bigfoot hunter. He's out there trying to prove the theory and the existence of this. And he works in sort of the upper peninsula area of Washington State. And if I'm not mistaken, he's got a show, Bigfoot Hunters, that you can find on Roku right now. Which brings me to my next guy. This is Barackman. I think a lot of you may know, born and raised in Long Beach, California, but he's been heavily featured on Animal Planet's new show, Finding Bigfoot. And he established the North American Bigfoot Center in Boring, Oregon, which is certainly in the area one of the most comprehensive places where the Bigfoot legend really gets examined, and has some fantastic exhibits inside. For those of you not in Washington State wondering what's going on, I also want to acknowledge the North American Wood Ape Conservancy. It is a tax-exempt, nonprofit scientific research organization that primarily focuses on the Texas area and sightings of Bigfoot. And they have contributed a great deal to the research that I'm referencing tonight. But if we're looking at proof, we gotta look at what we've actually got, right? And one of the big things is plaster casts, footprints, number one. The ones that have dermal ridges or show an articulation of foot movement throughout the woods, I think are the most compelling. But again, a lot of people bring up the concept of why is there no skeleton? And when you look at the estimated proportions of something like a Sasquatch here, it's easy to be skeptical about the fact that nothing like that has been found out in the woods. As a counterpoint to that whole argument, I bring up the fact that there have been thousands of sightings out in the area, and that if there were an intelligent creature that had adapted its entire life to being out in the wilderness and surviving successfully out there, we might not find proof of it other than the fleeting glance. I want to share with you guys a clip here of a recording from the 1970s of people's encounters that they had seen Bigfoot out there, and some of it is really fascinating.
I always keep my right door locked. I get on the left and I go around with my back to the woods, and I look up and under my car, around the wheel, no flat, so I feel up in there, and while I'm feeling, I suddenly turn around and I'm face to face with him. I mean, it just felt like there was something staring at me, is why I looked.
And you were face to face with?
I just about 15 feet from me.
What was it?
I don't know. As far as I know, I suppose it'd be Bigfoot, but he was the biggest animal I've ever seen.
The monster that Mrs. Baxter saw was 12 feet tall, as tall as these bushes behind me. Her story is similar to dozens of others told every year in this area about people who got fleeting glimpses of the Bigfoot.
Well, the first thing we do naturally is sort of check on the people themselves. You have a lot of people who see things all the time. So before we really get serious about one of these reports, we assure ourselves that they're responsible people. And then our second step is to find out what they saw.
You've got a lot of experience as a reporter. What's your attitude about Sasquatch?
Well, I've been investigating these reports and so on, and it seems to me that there's a preponderance of evidence, and I'm, let's say, 95, 98% that there is such an animal.
I love that. I love that he comes in hard with that one there. If you're interested in seeing that whole clip, please let me know. I can share the link with you guys online here. But the area that I'm going to encourage you to look at on your own adventures out throughout the world there is the Quinault Reservation, particularly around Lake Quinault. The lodge there, not only is it beautiful, but has a pretty good exhibit on the experience of Sasquatch out there. And of the sort of indigenous communities that exist in Washington state, I think they're the most willing to talk about the long-standing tradition of Sasquatch in the area. And it's stunning out there, and there have been an extraordinary amount of Bigfoot encounters that have happened to people throughout that sort of region there. And a lot of the people that have come back have had very deeply personal and moving experiences with a benign entity moving throughout the forest out there. And that some photographic evidence has come back one way or the other. I think if you're looking in Washington state, one of the interesting clips actually comes from Spokane. I'll share that one with you right now. Someone just brought up a really interesting thing in the comments here too, about what I've been calling the Mount St. Helens cover-up. If you start doing a deep dive on Sasquatch theory in the area, this is something that will every now and then ping, but that the presence of Bigfoot or Sasquatch is something that people in the area have known about for a very long time. And after the eruption of Mount St. Helens, several bodies of Sasquatch were found and then hidden, disposed of without public knowledge. And it's getting on sort of the fringe edge of this whole thing, but it's definitely something worth Googling and doing a little late night investigation of if you're interested in the topic, because yeah, there have been photographic moments that have sort of documented that experience out there. And yeah, a lot of people have reported seeing what looked like bears, but with human hands, that were killed during the eruption of Mount St. Helens and then just removed by an anonymous truck in the area there. Strange stuff. I do want to share with you guys briefly this one too, which I really enjoy. This is the beginning of the Don McCune show, and it has an audio recording of a Sasquatch and is beautifully vintage.
What you've just seen is either the only films taken so far of a Sasquatch or a deliberate hoax perpetrated on the public. It all depends on your point of view. Webster's dictionary defines a syndrome as a group of signs or symptoms that occur together and characterize a disease. In short, the cause itself remains a mystery. This week, along with John Green, whose attempts to unravel the mystery have resulted in numerous books on the subject, we explore the Sasquatch syndrome, a combination of signs and symptoms for which there is still no answer. The biological.
Really good stuff. You can find that whole clip online as well. Fantastic stuff. And he references Dr. Green as well, who was another cryptozoologist who really contributed a fantastic body of work to the study of Sasquatch in the area out there. I do want to give you guys another one too. This one is significantly more recent. Independence Day area out there of what someone felt was a family, a adult Sasquatch with its young moving through the area. You could unearth treasure troves, literally thousands of years of information about the presence of Sasquatch in the area. A forensic geologist was actually called into the Washington State area to conduct some research on the evidence of Sasquatch, and their findings were pretty conclusive that for literally thousands of years, Indigenous peoples in the area have had a belief and understanding that there is something out in the woods there, and they have preserved it in the rocks. It is, whatever you believe about Sasquatch in the area, there is a objectively provable, culture to the Washington State area, and a belief that this is something that affects us on the day-to-day. Whether or not we have any proof that Bigfoot exists seems to me not as important as the fact that it is something that affects the community and changes us day to day. And that the belief in something that could exist out there beyond our detection, living a life that we don't yet understand, is exciting and compelling. So for that reason alone, I hope that you guys have got to learn at least a little something about the area. Again, I'm no cryptozoologist. I'm not an expert in this field, but I am an expert in Washington State and the things that have changed its course and identity over time. And this is certainly one of the largest topics on that. So if you have questions, comments, please let me know. I'm always available to answer. I'm always interested in suggestions and recommendations for new tours as well. And if you have enjoyed your virtual tour tonight and you would like to show your appreciation, you can always tip your guide right here on the homepage of prettygrittytours.com, right there with our little PayPal button to help finance the next expedition of exploration. And with that, my friends, thank you so much. I hope you have a fantastic evening. And above all else, keep on exploring. I'll see you guys very soon, hopefully this Sunday, for our virtual tour on Tacoma Noir and the birth of the noir genre right here in Tacoma, Washington, when the Maltese Falcon was penned down on paper for the first time. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'll see you soon.